Welcome to Rates in Barrels. It is Wednesday, January 5th, first episode of the pod for 2022. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we will answer a wide variety of mailbag questions that have come in the last couple of weeks. So lots of topics to get to. We have some valuation questions. We have a question about some guys that don't pop in the Stuff Plus model and why that might be the case. We're going to talk a little bit about some early draft strategy stuff, mostly looking at a few players in the early rounds that are either jumping up a little bit unexpectedly or a couple that are starting to fall a bit. Just some observations from an NFBC 50 that I'm in right now, looking at the overall ADP trends. Happy New Year to you. How did the last couple of weeks treat you while we were off?
It's weird. It's like I got to relearn everything. You have all these, you have all these routines that you do, and then for 2 weeks I just did nothing really. I mean, I ran a little. Went to San Diego, and went to the zoo and the safari park down there, and nothing too out of the ordinary. Shout out to everybody who showed up to the meetup. It was fairly raucous by the end. We had a good time discussing all things Padres and fantasy baseball. And we had a good little crew there at Pure Project. In fact, shout out to Pure Project.
Hey, yeah, it's a nice treat for those of you watching on YouTube.
Yeah, we got a nice couple of tables outside, and shout out to my father-in-law who had to wake up in the middle of the night and let me in because I forgot where the key was. I had to hop the fence, was stuck at a locked door.
That set off an alarm or anything?
No, but a couple days later, he was installing some new security cameras.
He's like, if Eno after a few beers can get to the door safely, this is not a safe perimeter.
Yeah, so I'm a security consultant.
That's good. That's good that you offer that service.
The weak points in the defense.
Fantastic. Well, some things that have been on my mind, obviously not redecorating. If you're watching on YouTube, the walls and crap behind me have remained pretty much unchanged. If you look very carefully, that's a printer over my shoulder, my right shoulder, but it's in a reflection. So it's really confusing, especially with me looking into the camera and not knowing what side that really is. But right over here, we have 4 rolls of Scotch tape. Yeah, we got an excess coming out of Christmas. So if you need Scotch tape, I am your guy, Let me know if you need to borrow or take a couple of rolls. But actually, I had a friend who sent me a really nice picture to hang in the background. It's too nice to go in my background. It's going to end up in the living room. It's more of a housewarming gift for Steph and I for the move out here. So while that was a great gesture and intended to fix the problem behind me, we are still awaiting something else for that space.
You're looking for more of it looks like maybe a closet door picture.
Yeah, closet door kind of pictured. Like
you just need to recreate some of your old background on the closet door, I think.
I know. I gave the actual folding fake doors away because there was no way to get those out here. And the stuff that was on those shelves is in a box by my feet. So it's all here. I just have to figure out what I'm going to get, like a bookshelf or something, and I'll load that up. Eventually it'll get there. So
still getting used to it. I had some house shenanigans when I came home as well. The switch that takes the internet and gives it to the rest of our house just stopped working. So I had to go get a new switch. And then in one of the rooms, we have like a receiver that takes the Apple TV and takes everything and that just stopped working. So I feel like my house got hit by lightning or something while I was gone. It's very strange. We were only gone like 6 days, 7 days.
There was no lightning near us while you were gone.
There's never lightning. But like
it did. Thing here.
It went like 30 degrees. It got cold, right?
It did. I mean, it got cold for people.
Not
here.
Cold for you.
Yeah, I just kind of like, well, I guess I'll throw on a sweatshirt. Guess I'll wear actual pants today instead of shorts. No, I've at least adapted. I don't wear shorts every day like I did for the first 3 months that I lived here. So
you would fit in with a lot of Northern Californians.
Slowly but surely, I am beginning to make an impact around here. But we've reached the point of the year, with it being the new year, where one or both of us is pretty much constantly on the clock now, from now until opening day, whenever the heck opening day ends up being. there's been a lot of interesting threads popping up. I think with fantasy football season ending, we're going to see even more people getting back into the fray, into the conversation. So that's nice to see. Obviously, the NFBC 50s, all the draft and hold stuff we've talked about, that's picking up as well. I'm in one right now. We're doing one as an under the radar crew just to have some fodder for that show. That comes back next Tuesday, by the way. So if you listen to both shows, good news, that's coming back as well.
Do you have a preference for like the order of the types of drafts that you're doing, especially on NFBC? Do you like to start with draft and hold to really test your depth and get a full knowledge of the entire player field before you start separating like who you actually want at the top for like a 15 team or whatever, like a non-draft and hold?
Yeah, because I feel in a lot of ways, I feel like draft and hold leagues and best ball leagues and the things that we can do now have replaced what mock drafts used to be like 10 years ago. And,
yeah, might as well put some skin in the game if you're going to mock draft anyway.
Right. And I just think the draft and hold element, not having to make in-season pickups, gives you more license to just keep piling up drafts. It's easy to set lineups a couple times a week. It's time consuming to add more and more fab to the equation at a certain point. So
I think there's also another thing to it, is that those bottom guys that aren't being drafted, that you won't draft in 15 team leagues at the beginning, now they're at the bottom, but you'll start to see some percolation, right? Like you'll start to see some guys that, people are like, I drafted him in like the 40th in my, 50 round draft and hold. And then that's 35th. Oh, now he's actually a good target for my bench in the 15 teamers and stuff, like you start to spot some players that you're like, oh, I wish I had picked that guy, and then you'd have to take him the 35th the next time. Then you have to take him the 30th. And now he's a viable bench guy.
There's something kind of funny about when player prices change, either from the previous season to the current one or over the course of draft season. If you get in November, December, January, and you draft again February, March, and that movement you just described occurs, it's for some reason, even if you really liked that player, and even if you didn't, let's not say discover them, but let's just say you were among the first people to start drafting them and kind of bring some of the attention toward them, it's funny how you start to abandon them at a certain point on price reasons. And it's even like more intense when you're talking about a player like Cedric Mullins is probably the best example of this from last year. The people that loved Cedric Mullins last year, just a late round, interesting flyer, are to me almost less likely to have him as a top 30 guy in 2022. It's because you got the discount. You reaped the benefits. You found all of the value last year that he could possibly bring. And I think there's something psychologically difficult about paying full price when the price jumps that much for a player that you previously liked as much or more than anybody else.
I feel you really on the pitching side. And I think that it's just because, people sort of think that, I don't know, pitching is such a crapshoot that, I love Jose Urquidy, right? Like I would never pick him. There's like a certain point where I would never pick him because I don't think he's an ace, Brandon Woodruff is like one of the few guys that I picked late, middle, and top. That I was like, I'm gonna follow this guy all the way to the top. But he just showed more, I think, in terms of velo, command, and strikeout rate. Honestly, you kind of want to see that strikeout rate follow the guy. So yeah, I really feel it on pitching. There'll be guys that I was in on last year. John Means is the guy that actually comes to mind. Where when he was free, I had tons of John Means. When he was a top 40 starting pitcher, I was like, he still has to pitch in Baltimore, right?
Right. Most of the room for value profit was gone. So it just became a lot less appealing to jump in that spot. To answer the original question, I do like the draft and holds, especially the 15 teamers. The 12s are good too, though, just to figure out more paths to the different things that you're going to need, right? Like the exercise is making sure you're balanced across all the categories. Without in-season pickups, you can't really punt a category because these leagues all have overall prizes. Even in the case of the NFBC 50s, I think there's only 3 overall prizes. There's like a main event to the overall winner. Then there's like 3 online championship entries to second place, and then 1 online championship entry for third place, but you still want to be in the running for that. So by not punting any categories, you give yourself at least a chance, even if you're drafting this early, of building a team that can get there. I think it's a great way to say I didn't
I
get
don't
enough
think you can
speed early.
punt in NFBC.
You in a satellite league with no overall, then you can punt because then it's the same.
All you're trying to do is win.
Yeah, then it's the same as NL Labor or whatever, any standalone league that you play in, where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, strategy unfolded this way. I'm punting average or I'm punting saves or whatever it is. Punting a category is a whole another conversation for probably another day. But the thing I like the most about draft and hold leagues this time of year, aside from digging into the very depths of the player pool and finding some of the guys that are either going to be late rounders, like fringe, like 25 to 30 round picks later, or even people we're going to pick up later, I like trying to figure out where the weak spots are on the board. Positionally speaking, what are the shapes of the positions? What happens if I draft the front versus the back versus the middle? What happens if I get saves early? What happens if I don't get any saves early? What happens if I'm speed light? What happens if I'm power heavy? You can go through all those exercises. And I realize, every draft is different, but I do think putting yourself in that position at least one time before you go into the drafts that count more helps you. I think it makes you less likely to make a bad decision later when there are probably, higher stakes.
Yeah, it ties into that sort of round 30 through 40, those players. That's what you're finding out in the draft and holds and those deep picks. You're finding out like where is their talent late, and where could I, can I pass on outfielders? Can I just, get 2 or 3 good outfielders and then cobble together outfielders late because there's a ton of outfielders in the late rounds that I still like? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I think that you gain a lot of knowledge for the draft and holds early on.
The other thing I was going to ask you about just draft and holds in general, do you have a core strategy that changes without the benefit of in-season pickup? So an example of this might be being more aggressive with starting pitching, because if you feel like as a player, your strength in season is streaming pitchers and picking up the 2-start guys and finding guys in season who weren't drafted to stick on your roster. If you believe that's a skill you have, that skill is not as much available to you if you don't have in-season pickups. So then maybe you have to push pitching a little earlier, or is there anything else like that you take into consideration when you're building a team for this format? Because it's not exactly the same. Like there's some people that go even more aggressive with closers, right? You don't get the chance to chase saves with.
That's where I was going to go. I am a little bit more aggressive with saves and draft and hold than I would be normally. And it's not starting pitcher. Here's why. For me, I get 13 shots at it, maybe 14 shots at starting pitchers. That's the number I'm looking to get in a draft and hold for starting pitchers. And if you give me 13 shots at it, I feel like I'm hoping I can get 6 or 7 or 9, of which 2 are like streamers, 2 or 3 are streamers. That's all you need. You're aiming to get, you're aiming to get 6 good starting pitchers over the course of the season. You're going to give me 13 shots. I feel like, I can do this, especially since I have my darling, long shots, where oh man, I love picking starting pitchers the last 3-4, picks of a draft and hold. That I'm totally cool with leaving those out there. I always have names where I'm like, that's fine. I still like this guy and this guy and this guy, but closers. Yeah, there are names I like Jake Cousins. Here's a guy that Pitching Plus loves, that Stuff Plus loves. There's a path to him getting saves. I mean, it's a tough one. Hader gets traded. Devin Williams gets hurt. That exists. That universe exists, right? I mean, it's plausible. Hader's getting to near the end of his team control, and the Brewers will do anything. And then Devin Williams has been often injured, right? But just taking Jake Cousins and giving him a whole roster spot, you don't want to do too much of that, and there are tons of guys like that. Taylor Wells, is that his name?
Tyler Wells?
Tyler
Wells is the reliever, and Taylor Walls is the shortstop.
Taylor Wells is the guy I'm talking about. There's guys, there's a ton of guys that pop on my list in terms of Pitching Plus, and Pitching Plus for relievers is better than projection. So it's I love these guys. I love all these, but you don't want to have them on your roster because they're like 5% plays. You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
there's a real long shot, and yeah, okay, you can maybe paper over some weeks where you're like, I don't have a starting pitcher this week. I'm just gonna put in my, really good middle reliever that I spotted, but that's not ideal. That's not necessarily a league winning strategy. It's something that you do in the worst case. So I want 2 closers that I think are going to be closers all year, and then I'll take about 4 to 5 shots. And those can be late because I feel like, I have a good method. But I still want those 2 good closers, and I want them to be 2 good closers, not I don't know what's going on in San Diego, Pomerantz, or like I don't
If he's healthy.
that's a shot. You know what I'm saying? Like I think
Yeah.
there's probably 10 or 12 bullpen situations right now that are just shots in the dark. You're going to take a shot at them. That's fine. We all have to do it. But that means that you have to get 2 out of the top 12.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that in draft and hold right now, the things I'm thinking the most about early are saves and batting average. Like, who am I? What have I become?
Well, I mean,
Steals are probably a close
they're
third.
very difficult. Saves and draft and holds is like I'm saying, like you only get 5 shots at it. You can't do that like hot pickup. There will be tons of saves that are not used in your draft and hold.
Right. The threshold for winning the category is actually lower. Instead of having 3 roster spots worth of 30 save guys to win the category,
you can win it at 70.
70 or 75 might be enough. Yeah. And I think that's where, so it was a Yancey Eaton tweet, friend of the pod, Yancey, had a tweet back at the 29th of December. Here it is. Having done absolutely zero fantasy baseball research for the 2022 season, I'm going to go on a limb and predict that the overall champions of most of the big NFBC leagues will have gotten there by not drafting a relief pitcher in the first 3 rounds. Now, I think that gets at something different than draft and hold. I do think this is one of the key differences. I think some of the ADP we see now is unique to this format. So there's going to be some adjustments. I think you see Hader and Liam Hendricks going in the first 3 rounds of a lot of drafts right now, because if you can't make in-season moves, and if you believe that the quality of the hitters or the starting pitchers you're looking at in that range are pretty similar to the guys that are going to be there a round or 2 or 3 rounds later, you might as well lock in one of the handful of elite relievers with maximum job security. So I think that scarcity, leaning into that scarcity, I think it's actually a good idea. Where I think Yancey's point is more like when we get to the main event in March. Well, you get in-season moves there. And I don't think you necessarily have to go get Hader or Hendricks in the 3rd or even the 4th round to win there. But you do have to be either good at finding those 2nd-tier guys or 3rd-tier guys that end up kind of rising into consistent roles, or you have to be really good at playing fab. Play to your strengths. But I think all this comes back to one simple belief. There are so many ways to build a roster, so many ways to actually win. I just think you have to know, like, what is the cost of doing that? Can you do enough things right to offset the high opportunity cost of taking a Hader or a Hendricks that early?
Because the FAB cost is not only the FAB dollars you're spending. What it means to me is in order to be good at getting closers in FAB and NFBC, you actually need to devote a bench spot to a reliever. It's very awkward. It's very strange. But what you need to do is buy the reliever for $2 2 weeks before he becomes closer. And you need to hold him on your bench for a week or 2, and you need to know when that shot is gone and you need to replace that $2 reliever with another one. That's been how I've found success, is not spending hundreds of dollars on a newly minted closer that then loses the job the next week. It's been spending $2 to $20 on a guy that's behind maybe a shaky closer that hasn't lost his job yet, and then holding on to him for a couple weeks. That's where I found some success. So the equivalent of that in draft and hold, I don't really know what it is. I think to me, I don't really want to spend a 3rd or 4th round pick on a closer. So what I end up doing is trying to get like Raisel Iglesias and who's another
Presley?
like. Yeah. I think we had Presley and Iglesias in our draft and hold that we did recently, but those are the 2 names. Like if I could double tap those, even at 8-9 or 7-8 or something, like I'd feel better. And so I want two good ones that I think will actually close all year, that, you know, have some good evidence behind them, some backing, before I start taking shots. But I don't necessarily, in the top 3 rounds, I want to take an ace starting pitcher and 2 great bats.
I think this also leads to a lot of questions to like what kinds of pitchers are falling a little bit that could be SP1s, you know, who are either emerging pitchers that can make that leap, or guys that maybe pitch to that level but aren't being treated that way.
I found that the bounce back SP1s are really interesting in that regard. And I have a piece coming out tomorrow on that, about Nola and Darvish and 2 more names that I won't name because we have a paywall, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you should save that. Seems like a good time to say.
But
if you want to read that piece.
we did that. No, we did that. We did a little talk. We did a little piece in the off season. You know, December 27th or so, about just taking Nola's old strand rate, his career strand rate, and replacing it and giving him a 3.8 ERA, basically, based on his career strand rate versus his strand rate last year. So Nola, Darvish, Sale are guys I like as secondary. I think going bat and getting 2 of those 3, if that's possible for you in a draft, I think that's a winning strategy.
Yeah, I'm comfortable building it out that way. I am comfortable taking Hader or Hendricks late in the 3rd round of a 12-teamer. By the way, I just did it actually yesterday. Liam Hendricks at 311.
Well, in a 12-teamer, there's a little bit more pressure on getting top 3 to 5 talents at every position, right?
Yeah, because I also, in addition to getting Hendricks, 2 rounds later, I took Ryan Presley, so I feel great about saves. I grabbed Will Smith as the 2nd catcher off the board in that league, which I don't normally take catchers that early either.
Because the replacement value is so high.
Yeah. So that was unusual. And then Charlie Morton is now my SP1 on that team. But I'm fine with that because I'm going to go aggressive in the next 5 rounds, probably getting 3 to 4 more starting pitchers behind Morton. And then everyone's going to say, well, what about your offense? Well, I have a Tucker, Betts, Tim Anderson, Will Smith, Jazz Chisholm, first 5. Like, I have a first 5 of guys that mostly do everything. Will Smith's the only guy that doesn't really run out of that group. So I've got to.
What was the result of your? This is interesting. I think this will allow for a segue into our next topic. What was the result of your discussion of Jazz Chisholm versus Christian Yelich and Cody Bellinger on Twitter today? Did you get any interesting feedback? Because I've seen a lot of Jazz. He's climbing up on draft boards, and sometimes where I see him, I say, that seems a little high for me, because what was this? What was the second half batting average?
It's a problem. I think I took him at 86th overall, and I think it was the only pick I've made so far in this slow draft where I sort of had regrets quickly about it. Like, usually I don't have a lot of regrets about the way I build a team. I'm pretty confident in what I'm doing, even if I'm wrong. Like, I end up finding out I'm wrong later, but I still feel good about it in the moment. Lovely. Good feeling. The Jazz Chisholm thing that would inspire the tweet was like, how much more likely is it this guy gets better with K rate, with the ground ball rate maybe coming down, with the things that he needs to do to take that next step? Is that more likely or just as likely as a Yelich bounce back? And I'm talking 80 to 90%. That was what I threw out there in the tweet. 80 to 90%. Is he going to be an MVP again? Probably not. Like, it's hard to get to the MVP level, but we're saying like 270, 25 to 30 homers, 10 steals, and a bunch of runs scored and RBIs, right? If Yelich does that, where he's going
to be worth more than Jazz, I think.
Right. He'd probably be a 3rd rounder next year if he did that. Maybe even a little earlier, because he's been, an early 1st rounder before. Same kind of principles apply to Cody Bellinger. As we said before, they're always joined together. I think we talked about in the Rebounds episode, Bellinger pops a little bit more as a more likely to bounce back bat, which makes some sense. But I guess what I love about building teams is these sorts of puzzles, and it's a future projection built into it. What of these things is the most likely? And then beyond that, can you find similarly likely things that are going to happen later? Like, the things you need Jazz Chisholm to do are probably true of guys that are going to go later that didn't already get as much playing time as he did. And that could also vault them up into top 50 overall status, right? I think with Jazz, I'm okay where I got him. I think there were much safer things I could have done and maybe safer things I should have done. I had a great batting average foundation. I think he kind of pushes back against that a little bit, but I can absorb it. Like it sort of made sense there. The speed's real. The power's still developing. There's enough there where I'm not angry about it. But if you said draft in that same spot, get the same foundation, how many times out of 10 are you taking Jazz Chisholm right there? Maybe it's 5. Maybe it's even 3. And maybe it's a mix of other guys. Maybe it's a mix of Bellinger and Yelich for the other third of those entries. And then it's a pitcher. Maybe it's just going with Jose Barrios or someone else in that spot to back up Morton in the other couple of turns.
I find it fascinating what you're talking about in terms of like what you're asking them to do. I think so let's say there's a risk that someone was found out, right? There's a risk that any player that there was something that the league did in the second half, or so for example, Cody Bellinger saw a lot more fastballs in the second half last year. Jeff Zimmerman had a tweet about this. So what you're asking him to do is 2 things. You're asking him to be healthy and to do something about maybe high fastballs or fastballs in general, right? Okay, so those 2 things. With Jazz Chisholm, you're asking him to figure out the strikeout rate and to figure out the power, right? And in the second half last year, he did have the 228 average and the worst power, but he did have a 24.6% strikeout rate, which is one of the better. And he had some of the best months of his even his minor league career in terms of strikeout rate. So yeah, all these indicators back and forth with Christian Yelich. You're looking for health and power, right? And if you look at Christian's rolling power rates, you kind of see this peak in his MVP season that he's just dropped off of since. So maybe that was just a peak, right? So these risks are twofold for these players at this point. That's what makes it so difficult. You have the age for Jazz as a positive factor, and then for the other 2, for Bellinger, it's still a medium to positive factor. For Christian, it's probably getting closer to a negative factor, right? And you're asking them each to, other than Jazz, to get healthy, to make some sort of adjustment, and to get back to old levels, or in Jazz's case, maybe a new level. The uncertainty is a little bit larger for Jazz because you don't have the track record. But the age is saying you're asking actually Jazz to do a little bit less than those other 2 guys. He is healthy already, right?
Right.
And the
you're not
age
like having a major surgery.
Right. The age suggests that he should get better next year. And you have some underlying data that says that he could get better. So maybe Jazz is the pick there. But it is interesting to think about what are the likelihoods, what are the percentage likelihoods around these things. I tend to think that injury is a good one to bet on, because I think we put there's research out there for this, but I think we put the injury prone moniker on people too early. I think that a full off season for Cody Bellinger, where he didn't have the surgery, I think that could be everything he needs. He's young enough. I think maybe Cody Bellinger would be my pick there. But it is interesting to think that there's a range of outcomes for Jazz's strikeout rate, for his power, for his health. And that's true for Cody, and that's true for Christian. And so your personal taste is going to be some sense of risk around those different things, right? Like if you'd taken maybe if you took Tatis first, right? In a weird way, would that make you want to take Jazz later because Tatis is an injury risk and you don't want to take Bellinger and Yelich and have a bunch of injury risk in your first 4 picks?
Yeah, maybe there's some of that. I mean, I think when you look at the way good rosters are built, you have not only the categorical balance, but I think you do have a balance in the types of profiles of the players.
Risk balance.
You have some guys that could get a lot better. You have some proven veterans who are very likely to hit their projection. Like you have that mix. And I had that. I felt like I had kind of a boring team to that point. Like Tucker Betts, Hendricks, Tim Anderson, underrated, does everything well. I think the key that makes Tim Anderson underrated is that he's a machine in batting average. And again, I'm really emphasizing that particular category. Presley, Will Smith, Charlie Morton, that's an older kind of boring build. So maybe that was part of what led me to Jazz.
It's kind of fun to put Jazz in that mix.
Bobby Witt Jr. went 1 pick before me. And I just...
Before in a non-keeper?
Yeah, non-keeper. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well, so then you realize it's sort of like take your shot time. I mean, to me, take your shot time is sort of 8th and 9th round, but
yeah, this was the 8th round, so it was
oh,
early
okay, yeah, all
early
right, there you
8th,
go.
so
Yeah,
it's
let's
appropriate.
take your shot time. But Witt is, well, that's a shot.
I just think the way I'm seeing draft boards come together, I'm gonna have a couple of first rounders like I often do in mixed auctions, and then there's gonna be a bunch of dudes that have ADPs in like rounds 2 through 5 that aren't in any of my rosters. And I'm gonna have a whole bunch of guys that go in round 7 through 9 on my auction teams. You know, it's
Mhm.
gonna be whatever stars I can get at a fair price, and then a bunch of early mid
Because
rounders that just stacked up on my roster behind
I mean,
that.
just a little auction strategy, like especially if they're deep, like NL only and AL only. I find that the dollars are bad values. Dollar second catchers are nothing. Dollar outfielders are just such a shot in the dark. Dollar pitchers are likely to be gone off your roster in the week 2. You know, so what you're saying is have like two $30 bats and then a bunch of 10s and 15s.
Yeah, ideally that's the range I'm going to live in. Instead of going all the way up to like the 45 or 50 range for the top guys,
It gives you
probably
a
not
little
going
bit
to do
more
that.
money to get more middle round guys.
Yeah, I think I'm going to lean
And
more to
in the
the
deep
back
ones,
part
the
of
deep
round 1.
auction, yeah, the depth is really important. You're buying plate appearances and IP. That's why the dollar outfielder sucks, and that's why the dollar pitcher sucks. Because
Yeah.
you're not getting your innings pitched, you're not getting their plate appearances.
Looking at those responses to the Twitter version of the Jazz versus Bellinger versus Yelich, it seemed like it was split more between Jazz and Bellinger. A lot of concerns about Yelich's back, and that still being
Yeah.
a problem. I get it.
And he's got
He's
that
older.
age factor, right? At least,
Yeah.
yeah, Bellinger and Jazz are young, right near their peaks.
Yeah. So that seemed to be the more sort of consistent feel there. Like no one really seemed to want Yelich the most of that trio, but they're
Mhm.
pretty often I think going to end up close to each other, especially in snake draft scenarios. I think the guy that I really struggled with, and it was at the 5-6 turn where I first thought about him. If he'd been there at the 7-8 turn, I would have taken him. Is Joe Musgrove. He ended up going 7-3 in this particular draft, so 8 picks before my turn, where I got Morton. Is Joe Musgrove that much better than he was during compared to the end of his time in Pittsburgh? Did he take that much of a step forward? Great first half, had the no hitter. Second half faded a little bit. You know, the velo's up. He's got the cutter. Didn't have that working as much as he threw it last year. So there were changes. I'm having a difficult time looking at Joe Musgrove and seeing the weight on an ace option that some people might see him. And I know the forecaster box on him loves him, love what they do at Baseball HQ, and that was kind of bouncing around in my head too. But I couldn't bring myself to either push him up a little or even pay full price. And I'm wondering if I'm missing something with Joe Musgrove.
No, I'm in love with him. I don't know. Maybe a 12 team. No, not maybe a fifth. I don't want him as my number one.
Okay.
But if I do, if it was like a Musgrove Darvish Padres double tap or something, Musgrove Sale or something, I would consider him a back end top ace, and I would have to have some sort of mitigation strategy, just because there is the risk that he drops down to like a 92.5 type velo, and that somehow is really important to him. But I do see a real change in swing strike rate, pitch mix, a little bit of pitch shape, and outcomes in his last 2 seasons that I believe in. And the projections are really good.
Projections are really good. The projections would have told me to take him ahead of Morton if they were both there. And I think they had him easily as the best starting pitcher on the board at the time, based on Steamer, if I remember the dollar values correctly. So it's interesting that
Given their age and the
popping
fact
that much.
that Morton's coming off that injury, which I don't think will affect him. I mean, he threw 95 when it was still broken, so I think he'll be fine. But I would have taken Musgrove over Morton, I think.
Yeah, I didn't end up getting the choice to do it. I mean, I would have taken him around earlier, so just something I have to file away for the future. And all right, you see enough there to justify the increased price on him. There was a hitter that went really early in this draft. Not that he doesn't deserve to be considered where he's going, but I've seen the early picks span into the first round. It's Luis Robert. He is 13th overall in this one. It's only a 12-teamer. I think he's gone as high as 9th in a draft in the last couple of weeks over at the NFBC. I get it. Like, there's power, there's speed, there's tantalizing ceiling. And I guess this kind of comes back to how much risk are you willing to take early? And then a question of, well, how much risk is there really given what he showed us over the course of last season? It was a pretty big step forward for him. Obviously, it's a lineup that we like, and everybody's expecting, a full complement of games this time around. He plays 140 plus games and even comes close to his projection. The Steamer projection has him at a 285, 339, 507 line, 30 homers, and 14 steals. I mean, that is absolutely the kind of player that you'd think about as a late first rounder. Are you in on Luis Robert at that increased price?
It's really interesting. The strikeout rate, I thought he would have the sort of 30% strikeout rate he showed in his rookie season. And then last year's strikeout rate was 20.6, but in 300 plate appearances. And it seems to have had an outsized effect on the Steamer projection, probably because strikeout rate is one of those things that supposedly stabilizes quickly. And so Steamer's projecting him for a 22% strikeout rate, but he still has this really large swing strike rate. And when I look at his what he did to change, he didn't change the fact that he reaches at everything. He is a free swinging dude. In fact, he swung more often last year. And what he did was he swung more often at fastballs and sliders early in the count. So he became more aggressive in order to basically, and this is something I wrote about on Fangraphs a while ago with Josh Hamilton. Swing rate is not something that there should be one swing rate for everyone. If you have bad plate skills or like a bad contact ability, basically, you should swing early. You should swing often. You should swing so that you make contact before you get to a 2-strike count and strike out. That was something that Hamilton figured out. But it doesn't, long term, it's still a bad strategy because your contact ability, like especially on pitches outside the zone, is just going to drop. Right? So he did the right thing, I think, in being aggressive early. You hear people hunting fastball, hunt hard, right? Hunt hard early, look for something good early as the pitchers are trying to establish. The one thing that I didn't see is that pitchers did not change their strategy against him. So they were still throwing fastballs and breaking balls early in counts at the same rate as the league average. And so I wonder if next year he's just going to see a ton more breaking balls early in counts.
It's interesting because if you look at the swing percentage leaderboard, I set it down a little bit. I set it down to 200 plate appearances just to make sure that it's in there. Hanser Alberto, number 1.
Contact Meister.
Williams Astudillo, number 2.
Contact Meister.
Robert, number 3.
Yeah, not a Contact Meister.
But the rest of the top 10 is full of interesting, actually top 20 even. Josh Fuentes out in Colorado. Jorge Alfaro, who does not have plate discipline.
Well, and I think that's the problematic comp for Luis.
But there's good comps here too. Sal Perez coming off the best season of his career. Avi Garcia coming off the best season of his career. Tim Anderson.
Sal Perez makes more contact.
What about like Tim Anderson and Bo Bichette here as two guys that are in range? Because those are totally like Bo Bichette is also a good bad ball hitter. I think we're learning like he can just hit anything to any part of the park and hit it pretty hard. So like I'll take one thing I'll just say is I think I'll take all three of those guys from ages 24 to 27, 28. And I don't want them after that. Let's have some fun here. Hold on. Pablo Sandoval. Oh, we're gonna do this.
Reach, swing, extraordinaire. He's 35 now. So his career really fell off.
How's Pablo Sandoval younger than me?
20, yeah, right.
What 29. Is going on?
No, in fact, it actually fell off at 28. 28. So his career fell off after he turned 28. Josh Hamilton. other swingmeister extraordinaire. He had that whole thing though.
Well, Hamilton's aging curve doesn't count. Like it's a
No,
total
come on.
outlier. Weird. Like you can't
No,
look at.
it is. He's a free swinger that lost it.
Oh, you can use him as a comp, but I'm just saying like the shape of Josh Hamilton's career doesn't.
I know,
but
that's just. I think he just lost early stuff. I'm not talking about the accumulation. I'm just saying, when did he drop off? It was age 31. So, anyway, I think Hamilton is an interesting comp. I mean, he had a really high swing strike rates. He had really high swing rates. And he had really high reach rates, and he was a super athletic center field type early on, and he didn't age well. I think Hamilton is the comp here for Luis. So I'm cool. I'm cool with those guys in the middle of their career. There is some risk of being sort of found out by something a little bit quicker than other people, I think. By some sort of strategy on the pitcher's part, right? Like, what if everybody just started first and second pitch, everything was breaking balls?
Fair.
Maybe that'll be a tough obstacle for him to overcome. But in any case, it's more of a dynasty and keeper league concern, because the tools are just, as they say, dripping. I mean, it's fun to watch him play, and he just hits the ball hard, runs hard. Like, he does everything super hard, swings hard.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if the way to look at this is for guys that make consistently like hard contact, if an elevated swing rate is much less problematic for them. Like
maybe at the
standpoint.
Either you make really hard contact or you make tons of contact.
Yeah. Either one of those buckets.
Either you're Hanser Alberto or you're Luis Robert. Be one of those guys. Don't be in the middle. Don't be Josh Fuentes.
Don't be
right?
Fuentes. Yeah, Javi Garcia
for
years have been in the middle of this, though. No, I don't think you're underrating Fuentes. I mean, Garcia to me is like
Garcia hits the ball wicked hard, dude. He's in the top 20% of bail rate.
Always hit it hard. It's like he's in the middle results wise. It's like why?
But I'm just saying Fuentes is in the middle in terms of his strikeout rate is middling, and his barrel rate is not a barrel rate. It's like I am squinting to see it.
So yeah, there's definitely different reasons why you should be an aggressive swinger. And I think it's clearly reflected in the top of that leaderboard.
Yeah. So if I were Fuentes, I think I would. If I was coaching Fuentes, I think I would coach him to wait for his pitch. Swing hard. Maybe that's in there. I would want to know what his bat speed metrics were, right? Independent of his barrel metrics. If he is a hard swinger, then I would tell him to be more patient than he is. If he's not, then not sure how to coach contact myself, but I'm sure there are ways to.
We could try.
Jed Lowry had a pretty good thing where he sets up the tee at 9 different points of contact and makes sure, in order to practice making contact at the 9 sort of at the zone, right? So he basically in a way has like 9 different swings.
Yeah, so get to each up and in, down and in.
Yeah.
In middle. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I mean, that's about the only tee work I've ever heard of that I was like, oh, okay, I'm into that.
That seems logical.
I love these, like, some of these things are just so crazy. Have someone like 2 to 3 feet in front of you and off to the side flip a ball at you.
I don't really know what that is supposed to do other than get you to repeat the mechanics of your swing. It's not going to help you hit actual pitching, but it could make your swing more consistent.
Yeah, maybe it's just about repetition.
Yeah, just getting your body to do the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, because a flipper can flip probably quicker than a machine can throw or anything, right? Or even someone a flip could maybe flip you balls quicker than you could put on the tee, because you have to pick the ball up, put it on the tee. You have to have someone to sort of flip.
I still think getting those swings against something that is closer to the velo you have to hit in the game would be a better use of your time. But as you pointed out, neither you nor I are hitting coaches. So
one of my favorite one of my favorite drills that I heard from Donnie Ecker, I love this one. Turn the machine up to 95 for sliders, and then ask the hitter to swing at 30%. I was looking at him. I was like, are you insane? Does anybody make any contact? He's like, yeah, 10% of the time, 10, 15% of the time. I was like, that sounds awful. And he's like, well, that's the point. I mean, the point is to fail.
Interesting approach there, too.
So, I mean, he had some good results, man.
Yeah. Not a thing that initially would have been like, yeah, let's try that. And like, huh, that does work. Interesting. Well, okay. So with Robert, like I had him outside my top 20 among hitters. So when you throw in pitchers, that probably puts him in the late part of round 2 of a 15-teamer. Maybe the middle part of round 2, if you push him up a little bit. I had him behind Mullins. I had him behind Freeman and Machado. I had him behind Ozzie Albies. I had him behind Rafael Devers. I had him behind Starling Marte. And I had him behind Whit Merrifield. Now, I know compared to Marte and Merrifield, there's more raw power there. So there's an easy path to argue, okay, well, if we really believe the speed's going to be there, then he should be ahead of those guys. I think Devers is a much better hitter. I think I trust the floor with Ozzie Albies a lot more. Obviously, Machado and Freeman have crazy long track records of being early rounders, so different types of players altogether. I think the player that I'm most wrong about compared to the market here is Cedric Mullins. Like, it's almost like ADP has Mullins and Robert flipped compared to where I have them. And I'm trying to figure out if that's me being wrong or the masses being wrong.
I suppose it's, so you're making sort of a steals-based argument?
Yeah, I think the premium speed guys carry a little more value. And then I think the guys that we expect to run a little more consistently also carry more value. I don't think it's absurd that he's going in the first round, by the way. This isn't me saying I think he sucks and you shouldn't draft him. It's more of just like, whoa, people are taking him there. I didn't have quite that high of a valuation on him. Me saying a guy should go mid 2, late 2, and everyone else going, nah, he's more of a 1-2 turn guy. We're not that far apart, but I kind of want to make sure that I'm not missing out on a guy that could be, like, if you're taking him at the 1-2 turn, you believe that he could be a possible top 5 overall guy. You have to think that's a possibility if you're taking him there. Is that within the range of outcomes?
Yes.
It's pretty exciting.
I will take Luis or Mullins. I would do so because we haven't seen a full season of stolen bases. And the projections, I think, could be light on stolen bases. He had 6 in 296, and he had a major injury. What is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, he was hurt.
6 stolen bases. No, the number is right. 6 stolen bases.
Oh, the number. Yeah.
So that was a major hip injury. You probably wouldn't be stealing a ton. I think there's a 30-30 season possibility out of him.
Okay. Yeah. So you see early first round ceiling. Like, that's fine. Like,
yeah. And then also the projection is that he's, just using the auction calculator, Fangraphs with the 15 team and the steamer projection, that makes him the 14th best bat, right behind Harper, Betts, Trout, and ahead of another name we'll talk about in a second, maybe. But I absolutely believe he belongs there, even with my reservations for picking somebody with that kind of approach. But those reservations don't count for me as much when they're young and in the middle of their careers, the beginning of their primes. And I do think there's a possibility that the projections are light on the stolen bases. And I have one last thing to say, which is that Vlad Sedler had an interesting tweet about the averages of his hitters. His first, I think it was first 10 to 13 hitters, basically his starting lineup. And the average of his projections, they were for a 270 batting average, runs and RBI. I don't know, man.
Sure. Well,
I don't really think, maybe it's a failing of mine, but I don't really think about runs and RBI that much. 9 stolen bases.
9 stolen bases per slot.
Yes. So if you're
sounds right.
if you're taking Soto, how about this? Yordan Alvarez is projected to be 2 after Luis Robert. If you take Yordan Alvarez, you are getting behind in the steals race, right?
Yep.
So even though Yordan Alvarez's auction value projection is for like $25 and Cedric Mullins is for 23, I could really see taking Mullins over Alvarez just because I don't want to fall behind in steals, especially not with my first pick. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. So you're saying 10 per spot for the first, you said 13 hitters?
Yeah. So if you take Luis, you're not falling behind in steals at the very least.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you're going to get 9 steals. As long as he's healthy, I guess, is a question mark. But I don't think that's it. I think that was more just like a freak injury. So anyway, you're going to get your 9 steals. You're not going to fall behind. So no matter what, you don't fall behind in steals. And there is, I think, an opportunity for a 30-20, 30-25 type season.
It's pretty easy if you just think about your first 13 hitters and you expect 10 steals and you draft guys that get you like 0 or 2. Just like tally as you go. Like, oh, okay, I need 10 from this guy. Well, I only got 0. Add 10. I got to get 20 from somebody.
20 or 30. Yeah,
right. I got 10 from the next guy.
That's why
next
I
round,
like to
you're looking for 20.
That's why I love to pick. Yeah, I want to pick as long as possible guys that have 8 to 12 stolen bases. I don't want any zeros. I want to keep that accruing because then I won't have to take 2 0 power guys at the end or something. I won't have to take a bunch of shots at steals. And, I know that there's a lot of discourse around Malstraw, but and I think maybe he'll be good enough to be fine. And if he is good enough to keep his job all year, he will definitely be worth a lot in fantasy. But I want to avoid taking Malstraw type players because I don't think they keep their jobs that often.
No. Fully agree with you. Could do it. If he does, then he's like a $30 player. But the chances of him not keeping it are pretty high.
And they're way higher than Mullins does not count like that.
Right.
He has enough power. He has enough defense. He's not going to lose his job.
Was the other player you want to talk about? Was it Rafael Devers?
It was.
Yeah, because he's another one of those guys where I read the forecaster box and was like, yep, I'm on board. He mashes. He's an elite run producer, middle of the order. Third base does fall off quite a bit. Something that Ian was talking to me about just the other day. He's like, yeah, it gets pretty ugly. 12's not so much as 15s, but it's sort of a priority position in the early rounds for a lot of people to make sure that you've got someone that you really like as a clear, everyday, great skills guy. Devers, I think, could be first round value-wise and consistently falling in the early part of 2, middle part of 2, which, if you're in a position where you end up taking a pitcher in round 1 and Devers ends up being your first hitter, other than being a little light on speed with your first bat, that's fine. He gets you a handful. He probably gets you a half dozen bags. So use the trick we just said, like try to get 15 from the next one. And then just, eventually it'll all level out. I mean, I think because he can be elite and average in homers and in runs and RBIs, it's okay that he's not going to do a whole lot in stolen bases because those other skills are so strong across the board.
Yeah, and I doubt he's going to be a full 0, if you get that 5, you're only -5, right? In your note-taking device, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's going to be a minus 10 that you got to mark down. So, and then he has a lot of the same problems as Luis Robert does, but they're not as great. They're not as out there. And I mean, his swing strike rate is lower. His strikeout rate is lower. His reach rate is lower. He's had improvement in the years for his reach rate. And there is a situation where, at 26 next year, he could have a peak season. Peak season from him might look a lot like 2018, 2019, when he had 311 batting average, 32 homers and 8 stolen bases and all the runs in RBI you could ever ask for. The only asterisk is, that hand injury that really hurt him in the playoffs. But that doesn't seem like it's big a deal. It was merely elbow inflammation and will not require surgery, Chris Cotillo of the Springfield Republican reports.
I mean, basically 3 consecutive years of full volume playing time, just turned 25 in October. Not really a batting average liability at all. Legit power, good lineup around him. I mean, look at the runs and RBIs, both in 19 and 21 when you get to full seasons. That pops. Like triple digits in both of those categories is really nice to have. So he's just one of those guys. He's almost like a third base version of Freddie Freeman, maybe a little bit of a dip in average compared to what you expect from Freeman. But that profile, that player sometimes struggles to crack the first round, even though they can be perennial returners of first round value.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the emphasis on stolen bases. Third base is not a thought of as being a positional value. But there's also, I think, growth potential here with him, just in terms of that plate discipline, those plate discipline stats. Last year was his best walk rate year, and I think there could actually be maybe a slightly higher level where he reaches even a little bit less. And those are skills that you learn over time, and they peak around where he is. And this is going into his peak season, so he's the kind of guy that I would just be super giddy about to get in the second round. And in fact, he's the kind of guy that I would take in the second round and push and hope that there was a starting pitcher who comes back to me in the third. You know what I mean?
Okay, so if you had a hitter, Devers was still there early mid round 2, you'd be more inclined to take Devers and wait another turn to get that
like
first
a
pitcher.
Betts Devers. Even if I had to go Betts Devers, and this is totally plausible with what's out there. If I had to go Betts Devers Darvish Sale, my power is running out. But if I had to go Betts Devers Darvish Sale, like I'm into that, man. That's a fun beginning. And I think between Betts and Devers, I'm not behind in stolen bases. I'm at pace.
We had a few mailbag questions that came in, so I feel like we should go ahead and take care of those because I'll admit this. I nuked the inbox at the end of the year. I realized I was never going to.
That's a good way to get to zero.
Yeah, I couldn't catch up. I tried. Listen, if you sent us an email in the last 6 months and I didn't respond and we didn't talk about it on the show,
you gotta try again.
I would say there's a 99% chance that it was read and it was considered and it might have been on a rundown
for months.
And then it just fell and it just it got too messy. Eventually the room gets too messy. You get the garbage bag, everything goes in the garbage bag and you got to start over. That's what happens. So my apologies. And if you asked a question and it wasn't answered and you'd still like it answered, please send it again. It is not a nuisance or a bother at all. I have regained control of the inbox. I cheated to get to inbox 0, but I got there. Damn it. I said I was going to get there and I made it. So first question of the new year comes from loyal listener OJ. And it's a Stuff Plus question that you have partially discussed in the past. OJ writes, I know Stuff Plus likes Aaron Ashby less than a bunch of us do, so Eno has been less favorable, but last time you discussed him, some other numbers seem surprisingly good, even to Eno. He thinks it might have been pitching plus in particular. I wondered if there is a certain kind of pitcher who generally shows up poorly in Stuff Plus, but then succeeds anyway. It seems like a Jamie Moyer type or a knuckleballer might also be elusive. Quick note from me, I'm pretty sure any model that exists, knuckleballers don't count if there is one. But just the only rule with knuckleballers is that there are no rules that apply to knuckleballers. Look to see if there's another guy who shows up poorly. Found Ian Anderson. Eno explained recently that might be a function of release point. Does Ashby have some similarly flukish feature that skews his numbers? Is his release point as well? Does such a factor show up across multiple pitchers? I really like the tool and just want to understand the numbers that thwart confirmation bias.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot in there. Aaron Ashby does better by pitching plus, and the reason that the reason why I care about Stuff Plus a little bit more than pitching plus, is that Stuff Plus is more sticky year to year. So you could have someone pop in a given year because they commanded all their pitches well. Maybe a Cole Irvin type or something, right? Where he popped in a given year, but he doesn't actually have command that good because command is not as sticky year to year. Next year, his command is not as good. None of his stuff is there, and so he's not as good. Stuff stays with you to year. Somebody like you, Darvish, will still have the same stuff as he had last year, probably, and so you can bet on him to continue to have that same stuff, and maybe his location will be better next year, right? Ashby has a 93 stuff plus, a 99 location plus, and a 104 pitching plus, which doesn't make any sense at first, right? How could he have below average stuff and below average location and above average pitching? Here's the thing. Stuff plus, location plus, and pitching plus are 3 different models. Totally different models. Pitching plus is not taking stuff plus and location plus and creating another number. So basically, Andy Ashby's his arsenal fits better than the parts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the overall collection of what he does works better than the individual pitches in isolation based on how the models calculate them.
And to do this, and not in the parlance of my model, but to do this in the parlance of old school or scouts or whatever, Andy Ashby has an out pitch. It's the changeup, 113 stuff. Andy Ashby has a command pitch that's not his fastball. It's the slider. He has a 103 location plus on the slider. And he has good location on the sinker. So what he is a sinker, slider, changeup guy. And he can use the changeup for whiffs, which he does. He can use the slider for whiffs by using it in good locations. And then he can also use the slider for strikes, and he can use the sinker for strikes, and you can sinker for ground balls. So it all fits together pretty well. I do have a little bit more. I might be a little bit more wary of Ashby than other people. Just because, one above average pitch by stuff plus tells me he really only has one out pitch. And even if you count the slider as an out pitch because of the great location, on the sinker, he has 77 stuff plus, 97 location plus. It seems like a bad fastball guy. So, in there should be an answer somewhere.
Well, I wonder if that type of profile ends up being more floor than ceiling. And I feel like saying that then dismisses the idea that he could get better, which I'm not trying to do. I just wonder what that actually, what that means for a range of outcomes. Just because as described, it's almost like another way. The other way scouts would say that is he just knows how to pitch. Well, it's like, well, yeah, the stuff all works together. Like knowing how to pitch to me would be like having stuff that plays off each other really well, changing location, just working correctly, surprising opposing hitters, right? Just having that few things you need to be successful without being the guy that when you watch him, you're like, holy crap, this guy's untouchable. And does that necessarily mean that ceiling is lower, or is it just another approach? Like, is it, I don't have A+ stuff across the board, but I have a great game plan, and the stuff I do have works perfectly in concert. And maybe that's just as good as having A+ stuff across the board, but a terrible mind for pitching, or bad game planning, or bad sequencing, or not having even average command, right? So it's close to average command. So maybe you have A+ stuff, but you have below average command, and that puts you in that reliever bubble depending on the number of pitches that you have. So maybe he avoids the reliever section with this profile and is kind of a successful number 3 starter with strikeouts. Maybe that's what this profile means. Never going to be the guy that we're talking about as an SP1, but consistently exceeds expectations. Kind of does fit into the Ian Anderson group. I don't know if Ian Anderson's ever going to be an SP1, but he's still good. Clearly still does a lot of things well. Maybe that's the kind of pitcher Ashby ends up being too.
Yeah, for Ian Anderson, I think there's some things that that we're missing on the changeup that advancements in data and tech will be able to catch in the future. So I did mention his release point, but there might be something to the angle of his arm, which can be measurable now with Hawkeye, and the speed of his arm that we're missing. And there was a good piece by Justin Choi over at Fangraphs about the vertical angle of his pitch as it comes in. Vertical angle by itself is not a metric that is in Stuff Plus. So there are going to be advances in Stuff Plus as we add this new data in about the shape of the pitcher's arms, and maybe there's more to do with the shape of the pitches. So that could not be captured. What you talk about having an arsenal that plays off itself, theoretically, the model should capture that, because what you've got are the way that we do Stuff Plus and Pitching Plus, the pitches are defined off each other, right? So we are doing these things in their own little sort of stratosphere, and that should theoretically catch it, but that does not catch some of the other stuff you talk about in terms of game planning. You know, there are possibly spin interactions between pitches. That's not necessarily something that we have as a variable in there. So there may be something we're missing there in terms of spin interactions between the two pitches. And then lastly, you know, you could just look at his baseline stats for Ashby and poke some holes in his candidacy for ace-like behavior. Lots of walk rates over 4. You know, when he got to high A, his strikeout rate plummeted for 65 innings in high A. He's got the full missing season where he went from high A to triple A. You know, his ERAs were not outstanding, even though his strikeout rates were. So, you know, I think he's a very interesting player, but it's not a great park. He doesn't necessarily have a role to begin with. And his ground ball rates were all over the place. So it's kind of hard to tell. Is he going to be, you know, like a 60% ground ball guy with 10 strikeouts per 9? Then that's his path towards acedom. But if his sinker really does have 70 or 80 Stuff Plus, then I kind of doubt that that's going to continue for him. But the last thing that there were some other names. What were the other names that he brought up in terms of guys that Stuff Plus was low on? Or
similar players who seemed low: Pablo Lopez, Patrick Sandoval, Ranger Suarez, Justin Steele, and Huascar Ynoa.
So let me take Ynoa out of there. And one thing that I do see that's in common between those guys is just number of pitches. A lot of those guys have 3 or 4 sort of either representative pitches they throw a lot, pitches that was the one thing you said, surprise the batter. You can sequence interestingly if you have 4 or 5 pitches, right? We've talked about the Hyun-Jin Ryu kind of approach. Number of pitches is just a really hard thing. We haven't been able to put it in the model successfully in a way that improves the model. We can't just put it. We've tried putting number of pitches in as a variable, right? And it didn't improve the model. But there is something there with the things you were talking about, knowing how to pitch, pitchability, sequencing, surprising the batter. Number of pitches has to matter. But most often you get somebody popping in Stuff Plus like Huascar Ynoa, actually. One of my favorite sleepers for next year is Luis Gil on the Yankees. He pops because he throws 2 pitches. He throws a fastball and slider, and they have amazing stuff. And he kind of did some of it in relief. He could really fall off as a starter if he's still only throwing 2 pitches and the Stuff Plus drops because he's a starter and he's trying to go further. And he doesn't seem to have that wide arsenal that some like Patrick Sandoval has, right? I mean, the gap between Patrick Sandoval and Luis Gil is they're opposites.
I think
there's risk in both, though. Sandoval could not have the stuff next year to be that good. He could have 4 meh pitches. He could be a Cole Irvin, you know? And then Luis Gil, the risk is he's a reliever.
Yeah, but I think the difference is like Sandoval has an ADP of like pick 200. Gil doesn't go in the top 400. And when you see guys like that, like I'll take Luis Gil's flaws at that price each and every day because you can afford to be wrong. At that point, okay, well, even in drafting to hold, if he ends up being a reliever, there might be a handful of weeks where you throw him in as a reliever, or if he's their 6th or 7th starter, when the opportunity opens up, then he's good enough to be in your lineup those weeks. I mean, I just think your margin for error at that stage of the draft is pretty great. But where Sandoval goes, you're passing up on some players that could be a lot better if you miss in that spot.
Yeah, Sandoval is an interesting one. I've got him in Devil's Rejects with James Anderson, and we disagree. I put him on the block. If anybody from Devil's Rejects is asking if you made an interesting offer for Sandoval, you could inspire some arguments between me and James if you wanted to put a wedge between us. But yeah, Sandoval, 97 stuff plus, 97 location plus, 97 pitching plus. Seems like a average-ish starting pitcher.
You like Pablo Lopez, so I'm a little surprised that he'd come up as lower than expected in the Stuff Plus model.
Let's see what I've got here. 99 Stuff Plus, 105 location plus, 102 pitching plus. Surprising to think that he might be more of a command-based pitcher. I agree. There was some fluctuation in Pablo Lopez's stuff last year and in his career. There's been some velocity up and downs. There's been some finicking. He's tweaking. He's playing with the breaking ball.
Oh yeah, he's tweaking things.
He's a changeup first guy who has a great changeup, and I think the breaking balls could slot into place. And he's a guy that could change some of his pitch mix to change his stuff plus. Generally, I'm positive about Pablo Lopez. I like him. I don't think the model's that negative on him either. A 102 pitching plus guy in Miami is now. If he goes somewhere else, that might change a little bit.
Just a random toss up before we go. We'll save the rest of the questions for a future episode. Good way to start off the new year. Keep piling up those questions to get back to a cluttered inbox. No, we'll make sure we get to them. But Shane Baz is right there next to Pablo Lopez, and
holy crap, the model couldn't love him more.
I know, and like just look, even if you just watch those guys, if you like, which one of those guys you want to draft if the price is equal? Your brain and your heart are just going to say, well, draft Shane Baz. He could be so good.
The only question, I guess, is innings, huh?
I guess, but I think the injuries and stuff that Lopez has had, I don't feel like that's a runaway for Lopez necessarily.
And what did Shane Baz put together? He had a pretty full season last year.
Yeah, when you add up everything from all the levels, the workload was good.
Let's see here. 78, 81, but then he had some postseason.
A little bit of postseason. Didn't he also pitch for Team USA too?
Oh, Baz. Team USA stats, are those available? I'm at 83. I'm at 83. And then 2.2.
Wow. Is that all you threw?
I guess so. Anyway, 85. 85 is not a bad place to start. I think you can get to 120. I mean, 120. I could say they could push him to 120, 125. And then what's our innings projection for Lopez?
Probably like 150 at least.
Yeah. So that's the difference.
Damn it.
It's a difference. Although
he's never had 150 in a big league season.
Am I missing some minor league stats here? Because 2019, 120 innings, 125.
You got 145 back in 2017.
Oh, and all the minors.
Yeah,
but
split
that's
between
a long
Miami
time ago, and that's minor leagues. So 120 is his tops. In 2019, 125 is his tops. Wait, no, now I'm back to past. My innings predictions for both of them might be like 125.
It's funny. I mean, the depth charts will spit out a higher number just because he's been in the big leagues and per start, fine. You expect him to go 5+ every time out, but I don't know if you necessarily want to pencil him in for 30 starts based on the track record that we've seen. It's a great time of year, isn't it?
Yeah.
If it were for a lockout, things would be just amazing right now. They're okay anyway. We're gonna make it through. We're gonna find ways to keep things interesting throughout the upcoming month. I'm sure it means more draft and hold leagues. If you have questions about strategies for that format, for anything in general, again, keep the questions coming. Even though I had to nuke the inbox and start over, we want to answer your questions.
I saw a couple good ones that are in the new year, so we'll have to answer those.
Yep, get those locked and loaded for our next episode. By the way, 2 episodes per week throughout January. We'll try to scale up the schedule once we get to February. All of that depends on lockouts and draft prep. And
just need a little hope.
Just need something.
Get to the table, please.
Yeah, just at least for our sake, just pretend like you're negotiating. Yeah. You get the tweets that come in like, haven't met since December.
Oh, that's the worst.
Oh, come on. What are you guys waiting for? Meantime, if you want to read about all that stuff or read the piece that Eno teased that comes out on Thursday, get a subscription to The Athletic, 33% off the first year at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. On Twitter, he's at Eno Saris. I'm at Derek Van Riper. The pod is at Rates and Barrels. And if you've been watching us on YouTube, be sure to barrel up on the like button. Or if you haven't watched us on YouTube, go to our channel and just hit the subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it if you took a few moments to do that. That is going to wrap things up for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.